I will talk about my book, Dragon Suit, The Golden Age of Expatriate Executives in China. But since we are interculturalists, I would like to share more inclusive lessons that go beyond expatriate executives and go beyond China and are applicable to people who work across cultural divisions in any way. And for this, I would like to introduce myself very quickly, introduce my exercise, and I promise that these things are connected to each other. And eventually I will show you how, but please bear with me until then. I will, everybody has this kind of fear that I see my slides, but you don't. So I would like to check if my slides came up just now. Just give me a thumb up. Jacqueline, perfect. Thank you very much. So this is the book. I'm also going to share a link with you about how to acquire the book. Why don't I do that now? So in case you are the kind of instant fact checker type, I am going to share with everyone this link, which is, first of all, this is my book page. But also, if you want to contact me later on, then you just navigate over to the contact tab, and you can send me what eventually is going to be an email when I receive it. So if you have questions, if this topic is interesting to your school, to your community, to your event, then please let me know. The book is a collection of stories, and I really truly believe that whatever people do in cooperation with each other, ultimately it's about two things. The first is the story that we tell ourselves and tell other people about what is happening to us right now. So we have an amazing power of rewriting the stories that we experience. And then the second thing is the roles, not rules, but roles that we give ourselves and we give other people in this story. So this is the reason why whatever I write, I try to make the voices of the people in the story prominent, because I really don't know, and I'm very curious to find out what they have to add to the story. Now, this is a slide, a longer slide that you can find on my website, and I can also share it later with you. But in a nutshell, I was born in Hungary. I was taken to the Middle East, to Baghdad, Iraq, at the age of 4, where my father was an expatriate engineer, to a company that was later acquired by General Electric. So I lived in Baghdad, Iraq from age 4 to age 8. And I think that's where the travel bug and the intercultural bug bit me. And it is eventually what took me to being an intercultural professional. So ever since then, I'm very interested in how people interact with each other across cultures. But then you have to imagine I was again taken back to late 70s Hungary, which was not one of the openest places to the world at that time. I already picked up English as a second language, and my family spoke German as well. So I was extremely interested in people from outside of Hungary, but we didn't have an awful lot of them at the time. So I had the dream of working abroad, and my studies were determined by this. So I went to study languages and philosophy, then international relations, and then finally I studied diplomacy in Vienna. I went on to work for European Security Organization that you may be familiar with, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. Right after the war in Yugoslavia, I went there for a few years. I was working on elections and post-conflict organization rebuilding. So basically, when the buildings were ready, then we helped to populate police stations, local governments, courtrooms, schools, and so on, with people, with systems, with organizations. And that's when I found out how interested I am in building organizations and building skills. But also a kind of teenage dream of living in the Far East has rekindled. And after a couple of years working for this organization, I left. I went to China, and from 2002 to 2022, I lived full-time in China. I started a consulting career. I started up a small consultancy, first specialized in leadership and then later intercultural leadership. Most of the time, as you can see in this slide, I work with the higher level management of large European multinational companies. I'm still working sometimes with the odd Brazilian, Japanese company, diplomats, academia, but my bread and butter is these large international companies and their high level management. Now, this whole thing, including the book, which is a book based on interviews with China-based executives who work for these large organizations. So all the people who have a voice in the book are multinational executives. And I didn't want to write two kinds of books. I didn't want to write yet another fairly boring business book about doing business in China, a kind of brainy manual about how to apply Hofstede's cultural dimensions in daily business in China. And the other kind of book I didn't want to read is, this is what happened to me, so therefore this is what China is like. You know, this kind of expatriate manual, which, you know, if somebody once had like a broken tooth and they were lucky and the dentist was amazing, then the healthcare system in China is amazing. If somebody once had food poisoning, then China is unreliable when it comes to food quality. So I wanted to research, I wanted to do the fact checking, but I also wanted to write an entertaining book, and hopefully I managed to do this. And this is why I sequenced the book in the kind of life cycle of an expat assignment. From signing up, from finding out that somebody actually is going to go to China, until the time when this person moves away from China. Before I'm going into detail here, I would like to stop for a few minutes, and I would like to involve you in a kind of mental exercise. Now, all of you have much more experience working across cultures than most of the people I usually work with. So even if somebody has, let's say, worked already in China for years, they are not trained intercultural professionals, and very often this is their first intercultural assignment. But please try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody whose company says, well, listen, you're going to China to represent our organization. It can be for 2 weeks, it can be for 2 years, but please also imagine that this assignment is intriguing enough so that you say, yay, let's do it, I'm going to China. Now, in this case, I would like to ask you, and I typed my question into the chat box, what tool or method would you use to prepare yourself for a job or business trip to China in up to 5 words, please? Because if you write a story for us, it's very difficult to digest it for both myself and everybody else in the group. So I hope that the question is easy enough. Don't think too much. What jumps to mind? What is the first thing that comes to mind preparing yourself for an assignment in China? I would also like to tell you that whatever you put in this box, we are only going to look at it at the end, at the Q&A, because we are building up certain expectations. And then after that, when I'm done introducing the book briefly, then we are going to look at what everybody wrote. And I promise this makes sense. I will also tell you why I'm asking you this question. A few answers are coming in already. And I would like to ask you not to think too much. So whatever jumps in mind, that's why I'm limiting the word count, so to speak. And also the next question is coming up very quickly. So if there is anything that comes to mind, please hit us with it. Perfect, perfect. And also please do read what everybody writes. And let's try to keep in mind, although the good thing about the chat is that we can scroll back later on and we can see what everybody wrote. So let's wait for another 10 seconds. And then I'm going to ask you my second question, which is going to be related. It is going to be different, and it's going to be the last one. All right. So we are coming to the end of it. All right. Perfect. Some some introspection there, some books, some friends, some topics. All right. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to ask you a related but a different question, because now we would like to basically turn the camera around and look at how people relate to cultures that they don't know. And one of the best ways to do this is to recall what are the cultural mistakes that other people make in cultures we know very well. So forget about China for a second, and please tell us, what is a typical cultural mistake that foreigners make while doing business in your own culture? And again, up to 5 words, and we will know that Arsenia intended her answer to the previous question, so history, anthropology, and so on. Obviously, it has China in it, so it's very easy. So please just type a couple of words about, and please don't hold back. I mean, we are in a safe space. We are intercultural professionals. I didn't want to write the stupidest mistake that foreigners make in your culture, but that's actually what I meant. Okay, thank you very much. Excellent, excellent. All right. So protective, judging, small talk. Excellent, and we can keep going, and I'm going to switch back to my slides, so don't hold back, please. Keep typing that, because when I'm done with my presentation, then we will come back, and we are going to look at what everybody wrote and why I asked you this question. It's all about the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell other people about, you know, what is happening here while we are working between different cultures. So let me go back to the slides and tell you a little bit about the book. Again, I hope that the slides are large enough to see, because I'm not going to read them out. I'm just going to use them as illustration. But as I said, chapters 1 through 5, they are following the logic, basically, of people finding out that they are going to China, why the company chose them for China, why they accepted, because actually a lot of people don't accept assignments to China. And there is an interesting story behind those assignments as well. And then arriving in China, unpacking, settling in, sending kids to schools, logging into the CRM system in their new place. And then we are going on to the 3rd chapter, which is about working with Chinese and mixed teams in their new environment, how people work together, how do they imagine great teamwork. Then we are going on to chapter 4, which is about promotions and leadership in China, specifically 2 big aspects. One of them is hierarchy and responsibility, basically how each culture imagines the leader vis-a-vis everybody else. And the other one is the very specific role of politics in leadership in predominantly mainland China. I mean, we have somebody here from Hong Kong. That's more and more the case in Hong Kong as well, but predominantly I preoccupy myself with mainland China. And then finally, chapter 5 is an interesting transitional chapter, because most of the interviews and most of the research were done during the pandemic. So I'm going to look at why the bigger half of foreign professionals, we will be careful, not foreigners, but foreign professionals left China, and who will step into their shoes. Anytime, please, if you have something important to ask or say, unmute yourself and let's go, because there are 18 people on the call right now. It's not an awful crowd. So if you feel like you need some clarification, you have some experience you want to share, or you have a question, let's go ahead. And then when I stop sharing my slides, then that's open mic time as well. Okay, so this slide, actually, it's more interesting when I do this talk in mainland China or in one of the large multinational companies from which the interview subjects come, because very often somebody in the crowd actually knows the people that I interviewed. But once we are here, and I think it's unlikely that you know any of the professionals, maybe you know some of the experts, like Bronwyn, who is a very, very well-known coach, formerly based in Hong Kong and now in the UK. Perhaps George Hu, who is the best-known mental health professional for expats in China. But let me spare a couple of words with this slide about a pledge that I made myself when I started the research for the book, about being gender balanced and how naive I was, I really, really tried and I failed because I found out the overwhelming majority of expat executives in China are men. And I finally said, all right, instead of trying to be gender balanced and basically not representative in my sample, I will just stay with, there are fascinating female executives in the book from very different countries, but they are still the minority. I think I struck a balance to something like 40-60 probably, but that doesn't reflect the reality on the ground. So finally, that's why I ended up with the professionals that I interviewed. Also, the majority is non-Chinese, and that is deliberate because the only chapter where Chinese professionals come into the picture is the last chapter when I talk about so-called management localization, which is a deliberate effort by the companies that I interviewed to replace expats with talented local managers. And I also asked, as you can see in the slides, their headhunters, their coaches, their doctors, their people who are supporting them, HR managers, relocation managers, and so on. And this is how I collected the stories. As you can, I mean, as I never tire of repeating, my conviction, almost fixed idea, is that intercultural cooperation is all about the stories we tell about each other and ourselves, and what is the role we give each other in this story. So let's start very briefly with signing up. Now, you will see that my slides are just quotes from the book, quotes from the people I interviewed. But there is, while the quotes speak for themselves, there is always some kind of a very profound message behind these quotes that come out of the book. But since they don't come out of the slides, I'm going to explain them a little bit. And this one is about the importance of China. Now, obviously, you know that now China is struggling more, economically speaking, and closing down a little bit, politically speaking. So many people are asking me, Gabor, is this book still even relevant? Because we live in the age of decoupling. But even the companies and the diplomatic organizations that try to decouple from China, and not all of them do, will find China playing a very important role in the future. So again, the role will change, but China's influence and China's presence is not going to change simply because China represents such a huge business opportunity. It was a blank slate at the time when my father was working there in the 1980s. China was more underdeveloped than North Korea is right now. And because it came from such a low standard, and it developed so high, and Chinese people have been so creative and so hardworking, this is going to go on for some time to come. And I know that, you know, when I studied diplomacy and my specialty was Europe-Asia relations, I read a lot of books which said, you just missed the boat. So the great opportunities in China were 5 years ago. And some of these books were written in 1820. So if you're interested in China, you haven't missed the boat. There is always a next one coming. Okay, how do people end up in China? China stories and expat stories in general don't start when people arrive in the country. They start much earlier, and I learned to ask the question, who told you you would come to China, and what was your first reaction? And the first lesson to you about expat careers is that in reverse, when smart people look back on their expat career, they are going to tell you what a fantastic strategic idea it was to go to one country to another. But actually, if you scratch the surface and you interview them a little bit, you will very often find out it was a combination of factors. And sometimes it was completely serendipitous. So they didn't really know what China was, and they didn't really know how they ended up doing it. And if they were honest enough, then you got the kind of quotes that you can see in these slides. Marcus is an amazing man. Most of the people that I interviewed already left China. Now he's in the United States in a global role. And of course, the decision to go to China came over like a well-liquidated dinner. And they said, yeah, sure, I want to lead the China branch. And then some people just basically said, when I asked them, what do you know about China? What did you know about China when you took this? And they said, absolutely nothing. I didn't speak the language. I didn't do the research. All I knew, and this is very important, that it was a huge opportunity. And this is important for other locations as well, because the kind of opportunity that China was 20 years ago or 15 years ago, it is India now. It is Indonesia now. In certain respects, it could be Mexico. And people go to these countries for business reasons with very little knowledge, and let's face it, often very little interest in the local culture. They just imagine it on a career path rather than an intercultural journey. And I find that extremely important when we work with these professionals. And then you find yourself in the country, you've arrived, you unpack your boxes. The people that I interviewed and the expats that I work with, let's put it this way, they are a little bit spoiled. So I quote in the book one professional, and when I asked him, is it difficult to prolong your visa, your working visa in China? He said, no, it's very easy. You just take a couple of photos and you go and you give it to the HR department, and then in a week your visa is prolonged. So obviously the HR department does the heavy lifting. And people who start up these expat whatever assignments, you know, they are welcomed by a welcome committee. Very often their accommodation is already arranged, where their kids will go to school is arranged. Some of their furniture is shipped over. They don't really need to, let's say, speak Mandarin or know what the local currency is. And this is a very special kind of existence. Virginia, thank you for being with us. And I hope that you will have the time to watch the recording. So it seems that when you arrive and you plug in and you start working, everything will be smooth. Everything will be just like at home. And many experts, this is what they are hoping, because they just want to continue their career in another place. But this is not what's going to happen. Now, as I explain in the book, China is a very special country. And the specialty is shared with some other places, for example, the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates, where you're kind of shielded from the local culture by these special economic zones where you can incorporate foreign businesses, and you use a foreign legal system. And many of your colleagues that you go out for an international kind of lunch are international professionals. So people can choose when they actually start integrating themselves into the local culture. This is reflected in this quote, which is by the Asia Pacific head of Hayes. And Richard manages the international careers all across the globe of thousands and thousands of people. And he's a tall, very self-confident man. And it took him about, I think it took him 5 minutes to give this answer to my question. So you can imagine the body language of like, so Richard, what did you expect from China before you went there? It's like, what did I expect? You know, like if you learned NLP, then they try to teach you to read the eye movement. It goes left and right, up or down. I have no idea. It took him some humility to admit that, but I heard this again and again from people who went on international assignments. And then Attila Hilbert, who worked for Danone, and now he's in Russia. He's also a serial expat. It was an amazing learning journey for him, because actually, very interestingly, Danone asked him, is he willing to go to any countries in the world? And they allowed him to put down the names of 2 countries where he's unwilling to go. And one of them was China. The other one was Russia. Interesting. Yes. And then it took him, they they came back in 2 years. They offered him a higher level position, and they really needed his expertise in China, and finally said, okay, fine, let's do this. And then he learned an awful lot. He's very grateful for his journey in China. And this is the mindset that he had when he left. And very ironically, he is in Russia now.
Gabor, I was wondering, I see so many people smiles of recognition. So Anke, for example, you also went to Asia, Tina, Singapore. Yolanda, you've been to Asia, to China many times, if I understood correctly. And then, I don't know, Alexandra, you also have your Moscow years. Yeah, but let's focus on China. So let's maybe hear from some people how it was for them to start in a country that, yeah, was very different from their home country.
Right.
Please all unmute yourself and just contribute, and we'll just organically structure the conversation. Mm-hmm. And Sue, you've been to Japan, you live half your life in Japan. So what were your expectations when you went for the first time? I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I haven't been to China as an expat, but I have lived in Malaysia for 11 years. And when we went in 2005, well, basically there was a time when the internet was just invented, and I'm German, didn't really have a cell phone. So it was all very basic. My biggest struggle in the beginning was, believe it or not, I could not understand the English that they spoke. And I didn't have any expectations, but everyone speaks English, and I do understand the way they speak. So that was the biggest unknown, and the probably toughest 2 weeks in the beginning I had being an expat in Malaysia back in 2005.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you for sharing this.
Perhaps it's Piers speaking. I could perhaps share what happened to me when I arrived from South Africa and Belgium. And I'd worked in South Africa for Johnson & Johnson, and Johnson & Johnson wrote the credo and all of that about corporate behavior and the way to do things. And then I joined this company in Brussels, and it was a subsidiary of the American Management Association. And the Americans loved me, and they kept promoting me. Why? Because I voiced my opinions, and I engaged, and I told them if I thought differently from what they were doing or saying. And but then they would get on the plane and they'd go back to America, and I'd be left with a mixture of nationalities, 35 different nationalities, mostly Belgium. And then on a certain moment, I was taken aside by the then CEO, was a South American gentleman, and in soft, gentle terms, he said to me that if I didn't change the way I worked and spoke with people, that he would need to change me. And I was horrified, because I want people to like me. And I didn't think that if I told somebody something wasn't going to work, that they would take it that I thought they were incompetent. So it was a very rude awakening for me, and it set me on my career all about helping people to overcome such challenges and moving out of their own comfort zone.
Right. I have Erin Meyer's culture map floating in front of my eyes when you talk about this.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I will come back to the language example at the end. I will basically mentally edit it to the list in our chat module.
Yeah. Yolanda, were you just unmuting yourself?
Yes, I was unmuting myself. I don't know if there is time, but one of the biggest mistakes I had when I was arriving in China, I was supposed to meet a lot of other people, other companies, and build relationships, but I still sometimes had the Dutch expectation to build a relation in a couple of weeks, and that was also my manager's expectation. So my managers was really like, hey, when we have a deal. And I think, yeah, it takes time. And that was really a bit of a challenge also toward my manager, because it really takes time. And first you have to eat a lot and drink, and then you build a relation, but not like having a meeting in the Netherlands for even with the dinner, but then most of the things are done after the due diligence, of course. So that was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me put two things I heard together. One of the executives, I don't think she is in there by full name, but she was Johnson & Johnson. And when she arrived in China, her supervisor said, your first month is networking. And I think that was a wise decision. So she told me how frustrated she was. She said, that's it? That's what I'm going to do? And then she said, yeah, sit down and talk to everybody in the first month, at least once. And it paid back. It really paid off, because obviously it is a culture where this can go very far. Ursula, what if we move on and then...
Yes, please move on. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. And of course, yes, I mean, I can see Anke's comment. I'm going to reflect on it in a minute. And obviously, whatever we hear, we share, we are all going to incorporate it in the discussion, which is coming up very soon. Okay, so it is always a learning curve. I am really, so Attila's journey, he's also Hungarian, is a particularly fascinating one, because his journey, and also a female executive for a Brazilian mining company called Renata, they were the sharpest learning curve. Let me put it very bluntly, from China haters to China fans within a couple of years. And it's always a fascinating story to read about people who came to a country with serious reservations. That also means that they are not ready for integration. They are not open-minded towards local people. And then little by little, basically the country proving them wrong, the culture seeping in, and providing them with the opportunity to learn something that lasts for life. And I think the people that I call dragon suits in this book, they are one of the most important sources of the rest of the world learning about China in a language that they can understand. And this is why the people moving on from China, so there is a lot of resentment in China at the moment about expats leaving, but I think wherever they go, they will keep playing a very important role of bridging China with the rest of the world, their headquarters, their professional communities, their clients, whatever it is. So let's talk about work a little bit. And now I would like to reflect on Anke's comment. So there are a couple of ways to use the word expatriate or expat. In a strict sense, an expatriate is a person who works in a given country on a contract that is signed in their country of origin, and their costs are borne by, are covered by their company. So basically, let's say I am talking to you from Budapest, Hungary right now. If somebody from Philips comes over from the Netherlands, and then the company pays for their rent, pays for their rented car, pays for many of their meals, their kids' education, and so on and so forth. In the legal sense, they are expatriates. But of course, we also use the word in a looser sense of signifying anybody who is living for an extended period of time in a country for work purposes. So that's why sometimes we hear something like what Anke shared with us. Yeah, I feel I am an expat, but I'm not the kind of expat that we are talking about. So it's a little bit like when you are trained in psychology, and let's say if somebody is neurotic, it means a different thing in everyday language and a different thing if you, strictly speaking, define it as a psychologist. Now, when people go to work, this is when the funny part starts, because I will share with you where we make the huge mistake of jumping into another culture and trying to prepare for it. This is from a book that I love to hate. It is called Kiss, Bow or Shake Hands. And it is just, if you really want to read comically misguided advice about working with other cultures, then please purchase this book or find a place where you can download it without paying the author. But so it's very useful advice, isn't it? Familiarize yourself with all aspects of China before you arrive. Good luck with this. And you could say the same thing about the Emirates, Brazil, or basically any other culture, or even professional culture, you know, like find out everything about millennials before you lead people from that generation. Find out everything about the culture of accountants before you supervise accountants and so on. And then what people found out is that when they started working with professionals, mixed teams, and so on, many of their preconceptions were completely off. But they also learned that when they work in a large multinational company, they don't work with the Chinese. They don't work with the mainstream of Chinese culture as it would be described by Erin Meyer in her culture map. But they basically work in an intercultural environment within China, which is, first of all, large metropolises, places like Shanghai, places like Guangzhou or Shenzhen or Beijing, where people are already much more exposed to international ideas, international consumer culture, media, and so on, than people in the mainstream of the country. So this is why New York is not really the United States, Barcelona is not really Spain, and so on. And then the other is that multinational companies themselves, as Richard again said, people there are pre-selected, not by the company, but simply life. You know, it's like here in Budapest, people who want to go and work for a Korean company or an American company or a Dutch company, they have basic interest in working together with foreigners. And then Christian's quote, it's a very interesting about face when we get used to learning and working in a different culture, and then we look back on our own culture with the eyes of the expat and with the eyes of the interculturally exposed professional. And I coached Christian through the reintegration to Germany after 10 years in China and 15 years in Thailand. It was an absolutely fascinating journey where he almost took German, Thai, and Chinese corporate cultures, and he took what he needed from each of these cultures and built a team culture for his new business unit in Germany. And this is what we can all do. But we also have to remember other people don't see these cultures as relativistically as somebody who was exposed from childhood, like Attila Hilbert also was, or was exposed for a decade or even more to different cultures. So we have to remember that most people live in a kind of mainstream culture, and we have to meet them halfway. And this is where trying to walk in other people's shoes becomes so very important. Now, also, I will move on to leadership now, and later, please feel free to ask me about any of these. Life gives us a story, and we play a certain role in that story, and we can accept that role or we can reject that role. This is an excellent quote from a book by my friend Kyle Hagati, where there is this concept of guanxi, which is about networking the Chinese way. I'm using air quotes, sorry about that. And a lot of foreigners who work in China become obsessed with mastering guanxi, and then when they learn the language and let's say get married with somebody who's Chinese like I did, or spend an extended period of time there and they get integrated in the culture, then they find that number one, they are never going to be part of the kind of guanxi that Chinese people have in mind. They most of the time guanxi with other foreigners, but it works because human networks are human networks. And this quote is a Chinese person basically making fun of foreigners who are trying to network the Chinese way. things work differently in another culture. And when you are a leader and you work in that other culture, people you lead give yourself certain roles which you either want to play or you don't want to play. One very good example is in many Asian cultures, the leader shares certain characteristics with the parent. And this is not only control, but also care and responsibility for people. And there are many good stories in my book, and there are many good stories around you about this. But the point about this is that some people love this role, and some people hate this role when they arrive from a different culture, and they must play a bit of the parent role. So some of the people you will read in the book, they were thriving in this kind of community, family environment, and some of them, they feel that's an invasion of their privacy, and they try to get rid of it. And obviously, it very much determines on how they work with other people. Let's say if you're a coach, then how you work with these professionals and which way you help them develop. Another very important issue that I cover in the fourth chapter is politics, and how much you welcome politics or allow politics to interfere with leadership. And politics is becoming more and more important, not only in China, but in the United States and many other countries as well, in leadership. Because I was born in 71. Professionally, I grew up in a time when basically politics left business alone most of the time. As long as you were compliant and as long as you didn't like violate certain principles, politics was not so important in business, but this is changing again. And these are two quotes that can make foreign leaders in a country like China uncomfortable because there are certain political principles that you just simply cannot get around. One of them is that Chinese people relate to rules flexibly because in China, rules are too tough and change too quickly. So basically, the approach is to contracts, to regulations, even to laws. Listen, if we kept to everything of all the laws and all the regulations of du jour, we would never get anything done. And some international managers manage to get used to it, and some don't. Both of them have pros and cons. So when I coach international professionals, I both try to work with them when you get a little bit too unflexible, but also when you get a little bit too flexible and you can get in trouble with your headquarters. And then the other one is obviously, you could replace the Communist Party here with the Catholic Church or with the labor union or whatever it is, because we enter societies with a different value system to what they hold dear in those societies. And we have to sit down when we have to have a very important talk with people. When does business start interfering with these local value systems? I know I open big doors here, but we can discuss it in the last quarter hour that we are entering now. Finally, moving ahead, just mentioning two very important things. First of all, in many societies, and China is one of them, expats are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. I don't mean some top immigration countries like the United States, Canada, Australia, some Southeast Asian countries where you can have 10% or more of the population being foreign born. In a country like China or the country Hungary that is behind me, foreigners are rare and they are interesting, but also local population expects them to respect local rules to a certain amount. And there is a turnover in terms of expats. I know many of us say, just learn the language when you are in a given society. Just try to internalize some of their value system. But most expats in the world stay in a place for 2, 3, maximum 5 years. And they will keep living on these islands of crazy time zones, of foreign language, of foreign food. and they are not going to warm up enough to the culture within those expats environments. And that's why, first of all, international companies must always rely on local managers to really connect the company with local culture. But on the other hand, these local managers must have certain international cultural agility in order to be able to connect to the organization itself. And the company has to make sure that there is a very deep trust between the local and the international managers. And this is what Kurt Yu expresses here. He was actually surprised to become the chief executive of a global foreign company as a Chinese national, because that kind of trust seldom exists in these large companies. I'm sure that you are going to have your stories about it. These are two Laowai in China. It means it's a little bit better than in Japan, gaijin, or there are different words in different languages about the foreigner, like the visiting foreigner. Some foreigners stay, relatively few in China. Some foreigners leave. I think both of them have pros and cons. There is a reason why most empires rotated foreign officials, because they didn't want foreigners to get too warm in an environment, be too integrated in the local community, because then they simply didn't represent the interest of the global organization anymore. But on the other hand, if you rotate people, then they never get familiar enough with the local culture. And then one of the indications is that all the international executives I interviewed for this book have moved on from China. And that is mainly because the pandemic was so tough in China. So it lasted longer, it was tougher. Many foreigners who had a very comfortable life in China, they suddenly found out that basically the kind of control that exists in a society like China can suddenly interfere with their personal life as well. But also, after they left, then younger foreigners arrived. And I would like to share a couple of quick dynamics with you. Younger foreigners are more likely to speak Chinese. They do not have the memory of, let's say, 1990s, early 2000s China, when it was an undeveloped country, and then it tried to learn from the West. So they approach China as a big, powerful country that is a role model in many different aspects of life and business, including technology, including infrastructure, sometimes even soft power. Okay, why am I telling you this? And now we are going to come back to I already have this one more slide, and we will come back to what we wrote in the chat boxes. So where we go wrong very often is that we think we can brain this culture thing. So most of the managers, when I ask them at the beginning, what would you like to learn, or which area of skills would you like to support during the coaching assignment or during the training, they name high-level cognitive skills. Tell me about intercultural strategy. Tell me about cross-cultural communication between Europeans and Chinese. Help me to understand how cultures relate with each other. Negotiation, financial management, very high-level cognitive stuff. But then, where do we make mistakes? And please just scroll back and see, when I asked you about how you would prepare yourself for China, then here is what you wrote. Link between philosophy and everyday life. Colleague testimonials, very good, because that is real life stuff. Books on Chinese cultures, map my own preferences, books, philosophy, and so on. The head. I like separating the head, the heart, and the gut. The head is understanding, the cognitive stuff. The heart is human relations. The gut is basically the uncontrollable limbic system reaction to another culture. And when I asked you what kind of mistakes other people make in your own culture, then you can see many of them, if not most of them, are gut level stuff. And now, for example, when I help Asian professionals work in the West, which happens a lot because I'm a Mandarin speaking consultant, do you know what they hate? You know, what is it that they cannot prepare, and how the culture shock hits them? They hate European food. They feel lonely. They feel Europeans don't care about them because the work-life balance is different. So everybody goes home, thank you very much, at 6 o'clock. They become very lonely. They're physically isolated because the body language is different. And one thing, I mean, I don't have to beat this to death because you have the relevant training, but one unlikely skill set or tool that I would like to recommend is actually Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because most people who want to work in a different culture, they keep preparing themselves for the high-level self-actualization situation. But most of the mistakes we make and most of the experience that we bring home is going to be on the gut level. And very often when I turn Dragon Suit into a workshop or into coaching for HR professionals, we end up with very, very simple stuff. Don't send foreigners to subtropical climate in the middle of the summer, please. Because they are going to hate the country for life. They are going to suffer. Don't try to make them connect to a team of 20. Assign 2 people who are their first contact, and those 2 people should be able to speak their language and hopefully have some experience in another culture. I will basically turn it over to discussion now. I will show you what it looks like when this becomes China specific. So these are the issues from bottom up that I usually discuss with managers. Don't prepare yourself for Confucius, please. Don't prepare yourself for collectivist society. You will see very little of it in a multinational company in Shanghai. But brace for China's speed. Brace for China's size. The amazing diversity between cities and countryside, between one city and another, between highly and lowly educated people. And try to build networks, and then you can worry about traditions. I do this, I will send you all of this. I will send you the information about my workshops, my coaching, the topics that I usually deal with in each of these cases. And then I'm going to, at the very end, I'm going to keep this slide up, because if you want, you can join my free webinar next week. And we are going to talk about, actually, we are going to talk about this Maslow pyramid thing. And then, of course, you already have the link to the book.